The wind whipped through the dusty streets of Willow Creek like an angry serpent, sending tumbleweeds dancing and shop signs creaking as Theodora Bell clutched her medical bag tighter, willing her trembling hands to still. The year was 1878, and being the only female doctor in 3 counties was burden enough without the betrayal of her own body. At 26, she had already faced more scorn than most would in a lifetime, yet nothing cut deeper than the whispers about her shaking hands that were meant to heal, now becoming her greatest vulnerability. "Look at that, Doc Bell's got the jitters again," called Harlan Jenkins from his perch outside the general store. "Wouldn't let her near me with those shackin' hands, not even if I was bleedin' to death." Theodora kept her gaze forward, her chin lifted with practiced dignity despite the heat of shame burning her cheeks. Her tremors had begun after a typhoid fever 3 years ago that had nearly claimed her life, leaving her with hands that shook when she was tired or stressed. For a woman who had fought her way through medical school, who had defied her wealthy Boston family to practice frontier medicine, these tremors threatened everything she'd worked for. "Pay them no mind," she whispered to herself as she approached the clinic, a modest 2-room structure she'd purchased with her inheritance. Inside was sanctuary, at least until the next patient arrived with doubt in their eyes, looking at her hands before meeting her gaze. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and she nodded at Mrs. Winters, who cleaned the clinic 3 times weekly. "Morning, Doc. You've got company waiting," Mrs. Winters said, nodding toward the examination room. "Been here almost an hour. Wouldn't let me fetch anyone else." Theodora sighed, setting her bag down. "Did they say what's ailing them?" "Just that it's urgent. He's a newcomer tall fellow, looks like he's ridden hard to get here." Theodora flexed her fingers, willing the tremors to subside. After a deep breath, she pushed open the door to find a man sitting on the edge of her examination table. His broad shoulders hunched forward as he pressed a bloodied cloth to his forearm. He looked up, and Theodora felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. His eyes were a startling blue beneath the brim of his dust-covered hat, and despite the pain etched on his sun-weathered face, he managed a warm smile that crinkled the corners of those eyes. "You must be the doctor," he said, his voice low and gravelly, tinged with what sounded like a Texas drawl. "Owen Xavier. Folks call me Ox. Theodora Bell," she replied, stepping closer. "May I?" She gestured toward his arm. He nodded, removing the cloth to reveal a deep gash running from wrist to elbow. "Horse threw me into a barbed wire fence about 10 miles out. Managed to stop most of the bleeding, but I reckon it needs stitching." Theodora's medical training took over as she assessed the wound. "Indeed it does, Mr. Xavier. Let me clean it first." She turned to gather supplies, painfully aware that her hands had begun their telltale dance. The clinking of glass bottles betrayed her condition. When she turned back, Owen Xavier was watching her hands with interest, not judgment. Theodora braced herself for the familiar mockery, the request for another doctor, a male doctor with steady hands. Instead, he said, "My grandmother had hands like yours." Shook something fierce, but she could still thread a needle in the dark and stitch up anything from torn trousers to gashed skin. Theodora paused, unsure how to respond to the unexpected kindness. "This may sting," she warned, applying antiseptic to his wound. He didn't flinch. "Worse things have happened. Been a cattle driver most of my life, and I've seen my share of injuries." As she worked, her hands steadied they always did when she was fully focused on a patient. The tremors became secondary to the task at hand, and she worked methodically, cleaning the wound with practiced precision. "What brings you to Willow Creek, Mr. Xavier? We don't get many strangers passing through." "Call me Owen," he said, watching her work. "I've taken a job at the Thompson Ranch, foreman position. Previous fellow retired, and I was looking to settle somewhere after 15 years on the trails." Theodora nodded, preparing her needle and thread. "You've chosen an interesting place to settle." "Willow Creek has its charms, though I'm relatively new myself, only been here 2 years. And already the town doctor must be good at what you do." She met his gaze briefly. "Not everyone agrees with that assessment." Owen studied her face, then looked pointedly at her hands as they worked the needle through his skin with practiced ease. "Seems to me that actions speak louder than words, Doc, and your actions are speaking plenty clear right now." The stitches were neat and even, despite the occasional tremor that passed through her fingers. When she finished, Theodora wrapped his arm in clean bandages, satisfied with her work. "Keep it clean and dry. Come back in 5 days so I can check for infection," she instructed, stepping back and wiping her hands on a cloth. The tremors returned in full force now that the intense focus was gone. Owen flexed his arm carefully, nodding in approval. "Fine work, Doc. What do I owe you?" $2 will cover it." He reached into his pocket with his good arm and pulled out the money. As she extended her hand to take it, a violent tremor caused her to drop the coins he placed in her palm. They clattered to the floor, the sound deafening in the small room. Theodora felt her face flush with humiliation. "I'm sorry," she murmured, bending to retrieve them, but Owen was faster. He scooped up the coins and then, instead of simply handing them back, he took both her trembling hands in his large, calloused ones. The unexpected touch made her breath catch. "They're steady enough for me, Doc," he said softly, his blue eyes holding hers with unwavering sincerity. "And I'd wager they're steadier than most when it matters." For a moment, Theodora couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. It had been so long since someone had looked at her hands with anything but suspicion or mockery. "Thank you," she finally managed. Owen released her hands and placed the coins carefully on her desk. "I'll be seeing you in 5 days, then," he said with a tip of his hat, and walked out of the examination room, leaving Theodora staring after him with an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. True to his word, Owen returned 5 days later, though Theodora suspected his wound needed little attention. He came bearing a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate wildflowers along its edges. "For your medical supplies," he explained as she unwrapped his arm. "Noticed you were storing things in that old cigar box." The gesture touched her deeply. "It's beautiful, thank you." Their conversation flowed easily as she examined his healing wound. Owen told stories of cattle drives and the characters he'd met on the trails, and Theodora found herself laughing for the first time in months. "How did you come to medicine?" he asked as she applied fresh bandages, though they were hardly necessary. Theodora hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My younger brother died of scarlet fever when I was 12. The doctor couldn't save him, but I decided then that I would learn to save others." Owen nodded solemnly. "A noble calling. My family didn't think so. They wanted me to marry well, not spend my days treating strangers' ailments." "Their loss," Owen said simply. "Willow Creek's gain." After that day, Owen found reasons to visit the clinic regularly. Sometimes with legitimate concerns, a sprained wrist from breaking a wild horse, a cut that needed cleaning after mending fences. Other times, his excuses were flimsier headaches that mysteriously vanished in her presence. Questions about tonics for ailments that never quite manifested. Each visit ended the same way. Owen would take her trembling hands in his, sometimes pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles before departing, leaving Theodora with a racing heart and a smile she couldn't suppress. The town noticed. Whispers changed from mockery of her shaking hands to speculation about the handsome ranch foreman's obvious interest in their lady doctor. "He's just being kind," Theodora insisted to Mrs. Winters, who raised knowing eyebrows as she swept the clinic floor. "Kind doesn't bring a man to town 3 times a week when he's got a ranch to run," the older woman replied sagely. "And kind doesn't put that blush on your cheeks every time the bell rings above that door." 6 weeks after Owen's first visit, Theodora received an invitation to Sunday dinner at the Thompson Ranch. Her hands shook so badly as she read the note that she had to set it down on her desk to finish it. Owen had written it himself, his penmanship surprisingly elegant for a cowboy. She arrived at the sprawling ranch house in her best dress, a dark blue affair that matched her eyes, according to the dressmaker. Owen met her at the gate, looking transformed in clean clothes with his hair slicked back, though a few rebellious strands curled at his temples. "You look beautiful," he said with such genuine admiration that Theodora felt her usual composure slipping. The dinner was pleasant, with the Thompson family clearly fond of their new foreman. Throughout the meal, Owen's attention never strayed far from Theodora, and afterward he invited her to see the horses. As the sun began to set, casting the ranch in golden light, they walked along the corral fence. Owen pointed out his favorite mount, a magnificent chestnut stallion named Copper. "I've never ridden," Theodora admitted, watching the powerful animal trot around the enclosure. Owen's eyes lit up. "Would you like to learn?" The thought terrified her. "With these hands, I'd likely fall and break my neck." Owen's expression softened. He reached for her hands, which had begun their familiar trembling as they rested on the fence rail. "These hands," he said firmly, "are capable of more than you give them credit for." Before she could protest, he was leading her into the stable, where he saddled a gentle mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy, sweetest tempered horse you'll ever meet." Theodora stood frozen as Owen helped her mount, his strong hands at her waist sending a different kind of tremor through her body. He showed her how to hold the reins, his arms encircling her from behind as he guided her hands. "See, you're doing fine," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. For the next hour, Owen led Daisy around the corral with Theodora on her back, gradually letting her take more control. By the time darkness fell completely, Theodora was guiding the horse in slow circles all by herself, her hands steady on the reins, her face alight with accomplishment. When Owen finally helped her down, their faces were inches apart, and Theodora could see every detail of his expression in the lantern light, the hope, the admiration, and something deeper that made her heart race. "I told you," he said softly. "Steady enough." He walked her to her wagon, and before she could climb up, he turned her gently to face him. "Theodora," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "may I call on you properly? Not as a patient, but as a man who can't stop thinking about his doctor." Theodora felt a smile spreading across her face. "I'd like that very much, Owen." His answering smile was radiant. He lifted one of her hands and pressed his lips to her palm, where the tremors had momentarily stilled. "Until tomorrow, then." The courtship that followed was the talk of Willow Creek. Owen called on Theodora daily, bringing wildflowers from the prairie, books he thought she might enjoy, and once, a small vial of rare lavender oil that he'd sent away to Denver for after she mentioned its calming properties. They rode together on Sundays after church, Theodora growing more confident on horseback with each outing. Owen taught her to fish in the creek that gave the town its name, his patient hands guiding hers as she cast the line. "My father would be scandalized," she laughed as she sat beside Owen on the creek bank, her skirts hiked immodestly to her ankles, feet dangling in the cool water. His daughter, a lady doctor, fishing like a common boy. Owen's expression grew serious. "Do you miss Boston?" "The society, your family," Theodora considered the question. "I miss certain comforts. Hot baths that don't require hauling water, bookshops, libraries. But no, I don't miss the restrictions, the expectations. Here, despite everything, I'm free to be useful in the way I choose." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Freedom's worth more than comfort most days. 3 months after Owen first walked into her clinic, disaster struck Willow Creek. A flash flood swept through the lower valley, leaving destruction in its wake. Theodora worked tirelessly, treating the injured as they were brought to her small clinic, which quickly overflowed. The town hall became a makeshift hospital, and for 3 days and nights, Theodora barely slept, moving from patient to patient. Her hands shook violently during brief rest periods, but steadied remarkably whenever she set to work stitching wounds, setting bones, delivering a premature baby whose mother had been frightened into labor by the rushing waters. Owen never left her side, fetching supplies, holding lamps so she could see, carrying patients too weak to walk. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, he would wordlessly press a cup of strong coffee into her hands, his touch a brief comfort before they returned to their work. On the 4th day, when the crisis had passed and the last patient had been sent home to recover, Theodora finally collapsed into a chair, her body trembling with fatigue. Owen knelt before her, taking her shaking hands in his. "You're incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Not a single soul lost because of you," Theodora shook her head wearily. "Because of all of us, the whole town pulled together. But you led the charge, Doc." Owen's eyes were serious as he looked up at her. "This town may have whispered about your hands before, but they won't anymore. Not after what they've seen you do." He was right. In the weeks that followed, Theodora noticed a change in how the townsfolk regarded her. The mocking comments ceased entirely. Harlan Jenkins, who had been the loudest critic of her trembling hands, became almost respectful after she saved his granddaughter from pneumonia following the flood. One evening in late autumn, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods lining the main street, Owen invited Theodora for a ride to his favorite spot on the Thompson property. They traveled on horseback, Theodora now comfortable enough to ride Daisy without assistance, though Owen stayed close beside her. They crested a hill overlooking the valley, where the creek wound like a silver ribbon through the landscape, catching the light of the setting sun. Owen spread a blanket beneath an old oak tree, and they shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples. As twilight deepened around them, Owen grew uncharacteristically quiet. Theodora noticed his hands fidgeting with something in his pocket. "Is everything all right?" she asked, concerned by his unusual demeanor. Owen took a deep breath and turned to face her fully. "Theodora, I've been thinking a lot about the future." Her heart quickened. "Have you?" "I've saved most of my earnings these past years on the trail. Last week, I bought the old Miller property, the small ranch on the north side of town. It needs work, but the house is sound and the land is good." "That's wonderful, Owen," she said sincerely, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Would this mean he'd be too busy to visit as often? "The thing is," he continued, reaching for her hands which had begun their familiar trembling, "I don't want to live there alone." Time seemed to slow as Owen shifted to one knee before her, still holding her trembling hands in his steady ones. "Theodora Bell, from the moment I walked into your clinic with my arm sliced open, you've been healing more than just my wounds. You've been healing parts of me I didn't even know were broken." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I love you, your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, and yes, your beautiful, capable hands that shake sometimes but never when it matters most." From his pocket, he produced a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in its center. "Will you marry me, Doc? Will you build a life with me where we can both be free to be useful in the ways we choose?" Tears blurred Theodora's vision as overwhelming joy coursed through her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Owen, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and even as her hand trembled, the pearl caught the last rays of sunlight and seemed to glow from within. Owen cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Theodora felt her entire body might dissolve into pure light. When they finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, Owen pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise you, Theodora, your hands will never be mocked again, not while I draw breath." She smiled, touching his cheek with her trembling fingers. "My hands don't define me, and thanks to you, I'm no longer afraid of what others might think of them." They were married in the spring of 1879, with wildflowers decorating the small church in Willow Creek. Theodora wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, and in her trembling hands, she carried a bouquet of prairie roses that Owen had gathered at dawn. The entire town attended, including many patients Theodora had treated during the flood. Even her parents made the journey from Boston, their initial disapproval of her career choice softened by the letters Owen had written them, describing with eloquence and admiration the remarkable woman their daughter had become. After the ceremony, Owen led his bride to a surprise waiting outside the church, a brand new buggy with a brass plate affixed to the side. "Dr. Theodora Xavier, physician and surgeon." "For your house calls," Owen explained, his eyes twinkling with pride. "And for us, when we want to go to town together." Their life together unfolded like a beautiful tapestry of shared purpose and deep love. Owen restored the Miller Ranch, building additional stables and gradually increasing their herd of cattle and horses. Theodora continued her medical practice, dividing her time between her clinic in town and the small examination room Owen built for her in their home. A year into their marriage, during a particularly harsh winter, Owen fell ill with pneumonia. For days, Theodora fought for his life, her hands steady as she prepared poultices and mixed medicines. steady as she bathed his fever-hot skin, steady as she prayed by his bedside. When the fever finally broke and Owen opened his eyes, clear and aware for the first time in days, he weakly reached for her hands. "Told you," he rasped, a smile tugging at his pale lips. "Steady when it matters most." Theodora brought his hand to her cheek, where tears of relief tracked silently down. "I couldn't lose you," she whispered. "Not when we have so much life left to live together." As Owen recovered, spring returned to the land, bringing with it a special joy. Theodora was expecting their first child. Her tremors worsened with pregnancy, a fact that worried her as she contemplated caring for a newborn with shaking hands. "What if I drop the baby?" She confessed her fears to Owen one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over the swell of her abdomen. Owen kissed her temple. "You won't, but even if your hands shake, we'll manage together. That's what partners do." In the autumn of 1880, their daughter Olivia was born in their ranch house, with Mrs. Winters and the midwife attending. Owen paced nervously outside the bedroom until the first cry pierced the air, and then nothing could have kept him away. When he entered, Theodora sat propped up in bed, their tiny daughter cradled in her arms. Her hands shook slightly as she held the swaddled infant, but her eyes shone with fierce love and triumph. "Come meet your daughter," she said, her voice tired but joyful. Owen sat beside them on the bed, his strong arm encircling Theodora's shoulders as he gazed down at the perfect, pink face of their child. "She's beautiful," he whispered, overwhelmed. "Just like her mother." As the years passed, their family and ranch prospered. Olivia grew into a spirited, intelligent child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. She was joined by a brother, Samuel, 2 years later, and eventually by the twins, Emma and Ethan. Theodora continued practicing medicine, though she scaled back her hours when the children were young. The town of Willow Creek grew as well, and a younger doctor arrived to share her practice, allowing Theodora more time with her family while still serving the community she had come to love. Owen's small cattle operation expanded, and he gained a reputation throughout the territory for his fair dealings and quality stock. Together, they built a life rich in purpose and connection, their home always open to neighbors in need, travelers seeking shelter, or patients requiring care at odd hours. Theodora's hands never stopped trembling completely. Some days were better than others, and as she aged, the tremors sometimes worsened. But it ceased to matter, both to her and to those around her. The people of Willow Creek no longer saw her shaking hands as a liability, but as part of the woman who had saved so many of their lives over the years. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Theodora with a special gift, a finely crafted wooden medicine case with compartments for all her instruments and remedies. On the inside of the lid, he had carved their story in a single line. She was mocked for her shaking hands. The cowboy took them and said, "They're steady enough for me." Theodora ran her trembling fingers over the inscription, tears welling in her eyes. "You've always seen the best in me, even when I couldn't see it myself." Owen took her hands and kissed them, one after the other, just as he had done countless times over their years together. The silver threading through his dark hair caught the lamplight, and the laugh lines around his eyes deepened as he smiled. "I only ever saw the truth, Theodora. Your hands may shake, but your heart has always been the steadiest I've known." He drew her close, his arms as strong and sure around her as they had been on that first ride together. "And loving you has been the surest thing I've ever done." As they stood together in the home they'd built, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, children's drawings on the walls, medical books beside cattle ledgers on the shelves, the sounds of their children's laughter drifting in from outside, Theodora knew that what had once been her greatest shame had led her to her greatest joy. Her hands still trembled as she reached up to touch Owen's beloved face, but neither of them noticed anymore. They had long since learned that some trembling comes not from weakness, but from the power of holding something precious, a scalpel that saves a life, a child born into loving arms, or a love that defies expectation and stands unwavering against the judgment of others. In the wild and often unforgiving landscape of the frontier, They had found in each other not just acceptance, but celebration of their whole selves' strengths, weaknesses, and everything in between. And that, Theodora reflected as Owen's lips met hers in a kiss still filled with passion after 2 decades together, was the steadiest foundation upon which to build a life.